Today we're tackling using humor in sales, and we'll be dissecting some insights from sales coach Dan Gordon. So no matter how funny you think you are, you'll walk away with some actionable strategies.
You know, it's funny because when you think about humor in sales, you don't always put the two together.
Right. It seems a little counterintuitive.
Yeah, but Dan really breaks down why it can be so effective. And I think the biggest thing is it's about being authentic. You don't have to force it.
That makes sense. It's more about connecting on a human level.
Exactly.
Welcome to The Deep Dive, an intense exploration of how you show up in life, business, and relationships, and how they're all connected in the infinite thread that is you. So let's get into the dive. Here's your hosts, Marcus and Nara.
I'm Marcus Harrison.
And I'm Nara Daniels.
Welcome to The Deep Dive. Well, one thing Dan talks about is using humor to handle those awkward moments that pop up in sales calls.
Oh, yeah, those can be brutal.
He even tells this story about a time when a well-placed joke saved a sale that was going totally south.
Wait, is this the one with the crucifix?
Yes. So picture this. Dan's in a meeting with his prospect, and he sees a crucifix on the wall.
Okay.
And he, tries to make conversation. It says something like, "Oh, I admire your faith."
Seems harmless enough.
Right. Well, turns out this prospect was pretty passionate about his beliefs.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, he starts going on about how everyone should believe in Jesus, including Jewish people like Dan.
Wow, talk about awkward.
I know, right? So now he's in this theological debate instead of a sales meeting.
So what did he do?
Well, instead of ignoring it or trying to force the conversation back to business, he just leans into the awkwardness.
Okay.
He goes, "All right, really important question. What's our next topic? Sex or politics?"
Oh my gosh.
And somehow it worked. They both just burst out laughing and the tension was gone.
I guess sometimes you just got to call it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And from there, the conversation naturally flowed back to the sale.
So the takeaway is don't shy away from those awkward moments.
Yeah.
Use humor to acknowledge them, and you can totally shift the dynamic.
Right, because let's face it, sales calls can be kind of stiff sometimes. A little humor can make everyone feel more at ease.
Absolutely.
And Dan actually recommends a specific type of humor for these situations. He calls it light self-deprecating humor.
So basically making fun of yourself a little bit.
Exactly. Especially poking fun at the sales process itself.
I like that. It shows you don't take yourself too seriously.
Right. It makes you more relatable. One of his go-to lines is, "Okay, now comes the big giant close."
Yeah, we all know that's coming.
It's like acknowledging the elephant in the room, but in a playful way.
And he also talks about making fun of salespeople in general, like saying something like, "I can't wait to be totally pushy with you today."
Right. It's like taking the sting out of those stereotypes.
Makes you seem more genuine.
Exactly. But Dan also warns against self-deprecating humor that undermines your credibility.
Oh, yeah, like you don't want to say something that makes you look incompetent.
Right. So you got to find that sweet spot between being relatable and still being professional.
Like, "I can't believe I wore mismatched socks to this meeting" is probably fine, but "I'm terrible with technology" could be a deal breaker.
Especially if you're selling software or something.
Exactly. So it seems like finding the right type of humor for each situation is super important.
Definitely. It's all about reading the room and knowing your audience.
Well, besides self-deprecation, what other types of humor does Dan recommend?
He's a big fan of what he calls observational humor, which basically means finding the funny in everyday situations and tailoring it to your prospect.
So like noticing things about their surroundings or interests?
Yeah, exactly. It requires you to be present and pay attention, which is a good thing anyway.
It shows you're genuinely interested.
Right. Like if you're on a Zoom call and you see the prospect has pictures of bulldogs in the background, you might say something like, "You must really be a bulldog in your business."
Uh-huh. That's cute.
That's a simple observation, but it shows you're paying attention and you're willing to have a little fun with them.
I like it. What about shared experiences, like working from home?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. You could make a joke about your dog barking during meetings or the joys of trying to work with kids running around.
We've all been there.
Exactly. And those shared experiences help create a bond and make the interaction feel less transactional.
Or
All right, speaking of connecting on a human level, Dan also suggests incorporating cultural references and analogies into your humor.
So things like movie quotes or pop culture references.
Yeah, anything that might resonate with your prospect. He gave some examples like using a Star Wars reference to say, "We're going to use the Force to achieve your goals."
I love that.
Or you could liken a sales process to climbing into the DeLorean and hitting 88 miles per hour from Back to the Future.
Those are great. I think those kinds of references can really make your message stick.
For sure. Now, I know what some people are thinking. What about dad jokes and puns?
Oh man, those can be dangerous territory.
Right. A bad dad joke can really kill the mood.
Dan doesn't rule them out completely, but he says to use them sparingly.
And make sure they're actually funny.
Exactly. It all comes back to reading the room and knowing your audience.
Exactly. He's not just telling people to use humor, he's teaching them how to truly understand their prospects and tailor their approach accordingly.
So it's not just about telling jokes, it's about building genuine connections and using humor to enhance those connections.
Exactly. It's a much more nuanced approach than I think a lot of people realize.
Well, I'm definitely starting to see the power of humor in sales now.
Me too.
Yeah.
I think we've covered a lot of ground here. But how do we actually put these ideas into practice?
Well, the first step is to identify those moments in your sales process where humor could be most effective.
So like when you're transitioning to pricing or dealing with an objection.
Exactly. Those are prime opportunities to lighten the mood. And don't forget about the beginning of the call. Breaking the ice with a well-placed joke or funny observation can set a positive tone for the whole interaction.
Right, so pinpointing those humor opportunities. What's next?
Then it's time to build your humor toolkit. Basically, this means coming up with a repertoire of jokes, stories, observations, even quick one-liners that you feel comfortable using.
So it's like having a go-to arsenal of funny material.
Exactly. And the key here is authenticity. It has to be stuff that feels natural to you. Don't try to force something that doesn't fit your personality.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
You want it to come across as genuine.
Right. And remember, what works for one person might not work for another. It's about finding your own comedic voice.
This reminds me of prepping for a presentation. You wouldn't just wing it, you'd practice beforehand.
Totally. The more you practice, the more comfortable you'll become using humor in sales. You'll develop a sense of timing and delivery, and you'll be able to adjust based on the situation.
So how do you actually go about building this humor toolkit? Do you just sit down and try to brainstorm funny things?
Brainstorming can help, but I think it's more about paying attention to what makes you laugh in everyday life. What are those moments that strike you as funny? Maybe it's a quirky observation about people, a funny interaction you had with someone, or even just a silly thought that popped into your head.
So be more aware of the humor that already exists around you.
Exactly. And see if you can translate those moments to your sales interactions.
You can also borrow material from other sources, right? Like comedians or movies.
Totally. Think of it like creating a humor swipe file. Collect those bits of humor that resonate with you and see if you can adapt them to your own style.
Okay, so we're identifying those opportunities for humor, building our repertoire. What else is important to keep in mind?
Well, this might seem obvious, but it's crucial to pay attention to your prospects and tailor your humor to their personality.
So what one person finds hilarious, another might find offensive.
Exactly. That's why active listening is so important. It's not just about hearing their words, it's about picking up on their tone, their body language, their overall vibe.
Like, are they sarcastic? Do they appreciate dry humor?
Right. You need to get a sense of their sense of humor so you can choose material that's going to resonate with them.
It's almost like being a comedic chameleon.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And remember, Dan talked about observational humor. That can be a goldmine here. Paying attention to your prospects' surroundings, their interests, even their LinkedIn profile can give you clues about what they might find funny.
So do your research before the call. Look for those common threads that can spark a connection.
And don't be afraid to ask questions. People love to talk about their passions, and those conversations can lead to natural opportunities for humor.
So it's all about being present, being engaged, and using humor as a way to build rapport.
Exactly. Now remember, humor is subjective. What works for one person might not work for another.
That's why it's so important to be willing to experiment and see what gets a laugh.
Don't be afraid to try different things and adjust your approach accordingly.
It's all about treating humor as a skill you can develop over time.
And that's a really empowering message. It means that anyone can learn to use humor effectively in sales, even if they don't consider themselves naturally funny.
But what if you try a joke and it falls flat? How do you recover from that?
First of all, don't beat yourself up. It happens to the best of us. Even professional comedians bomb sometimes. The key is to not dwell on it and keep the conversation moving.
So just acknowledge it and move on.
Exactly. You can make a self-deprecating comment like, well, that one didn't land, or simply transition to another topic.
So don't let one failed joke derail the entire interaction.
Right. And remember, humor is just one tool in your sales toolkit. It's not a magic bullet, and it's not always appropriate.
There are times when a more serious approach is needed.
Absolutely. The key is to use your judgment and always prioritize building genuine connections with your prospects.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into using humor in sales,
Yeah.
What are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Oh, I think the biggest one is that humor is a skill you can develop.
It's not something you're born with or without.
Exactly. And it's a skill that can have a huge impact on your sales success.
We've talked about different types of humor.
Right, from self-deprecation to observational humor to cultural references and analogies.
And we've explored how to apply them in different situations.
Like handling objections or just making the conversation more engaging.
But I think it's important to remember that there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Definitely. What works for one person might not work for another.
So you have to be self-aware, know your audience, and be willing to experiment.
And don't be afraid to bomb every now and then.
Yeah, everyone has those moments where a joke falls flat.
It's part of the process.
The important thing is to not let it discourage you.
Just keep practicing and you'll get better over time.
For those who are ready to start incorporating humor into their sales interactions, what are some actionable steps they can take?
We'll start by paying attention to the humor that already exists in your life. What makes you laugh? What makes you smile?
Those are great starting points.
And see if you can adapt those observations or experiences to a sales context.
You can also draw inspiration from other sources like comedians or movies.
Find what resonates with you and make it your own.
And of course, practice, practice, practice. The more you use humor, the more comfortable you'll become.
And the more fun you'll have along the way.
Remember, the goal is not to be the funniest person in the room. It's to use humor as a way to connect with your prospects, build rapport, and make the whole sales process more enjoyable.
For everyone involved.
Because at the end of the day, people buy from people they like and trust.
And humor can be a powerful tool for building those connections.
So as you head into your next sales call, think about how you can incorporate humor in a way that feels genuine, connects with your prospect, and makes the interaction more enjoyable for both of you. Experiment a little and see what happens. You might be surprised at the results.
You never know. You might just discover a hidden comedic talent.
That's all for today's deep dive on using humor in sales. We hope you found it insightful and entertaining.
Thanks for joining us.
And we'll see you in the next deep dive, where we'll be exploring another fascinating topic that can help you achieve greater success in your personal and professional life. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep those sales conversations lively.
We hope you enjoyed the deep dive. Subscribe to the podcast for more deep dives as Nara and Marcus traverse the infinite exploration into the mind and soul of you. We'll see you next time on The Dive.